You specialize in that, right? You specialize in that small shift in order to align themselves with their values, mission, vision, and all of those things that we've talked about hundreds of times on the show. How do you do that, dude? How do you just help them make a shift to maybe be a little bit more in line or be a little bit more modern or accentuate the things because their practice has changed?
As a Sorry, I just clicked my tongue, but that's a really good question. And that's why there's a difference between a brand refresh and a rebrand. When it comes to the refresh, it's the best way to describe it is like, look at your house. You have a beautiful house. You looked at it for 15 years, but things are changing. The kids are gone. You no longer, you can turn the room into like a gym. You can turn it into like a studio, whatever you wanted to choose, right? So you paint the walls, you take out the old bed, you change the few accessories, you update the kitchen, you get that big island, you get the expensive stuff that you've always wanted to, right? But the structure, the framing, everything, the bones of the house is still the same, right? So with a brand, the mission, the vision, the vision, and the values can be the same. It could, evolve a little bit, but you need a new paint on the wall. You need to update those colors a little bit. You need to change the hue of that blue a little bit to align more with the brand archetype of having this very passionate brand, right? Um, and a lot of firms typically will go with that blue and green look or a gold and black look, but it doesn't have to look like everybody else. We can change it a little bit to make sure that it's truly aligned with your brand, because we want you to be able to tell your own story. And if you can't, then that defeats the purpose of everything that we've done. And a lot of times when people want a refresh or a rebrand, it's because there's some sort of evolution in their practice. Things are being kept up by pieces of duct tape. And they're like, all right, this is okay for now. We will fix this when we get back. That outlet's just hanging there by that one little screw, but it's okay because the electricity doesn't work anymore. Little things like that, and we come in there almost like a repairman to make everything feel not only structurally fine, but beautiful on the outside and the inside to make everyone happy.
Welcome to another Top Advisor Marketing Podcast. I am your host, Matt Halloran. All right, I met Josh a number of years ago, 3-ish, 2.5 years ago, at a conference, and he was sitting there with his iPad, and he was basically, well, everybody was walking up to him and asking him to update their headshot. And he was doing this unbelievable graphic design treatment on people's headshots. I am sure you have seen them places, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, all over. People actually put them on the freaking websites. And so I met Josh. I was like, man, I really like this guy. I love what he's doing. And I was like, okay, well, I'd love to have you on the show. And after we talked a little bit, I was like, I don't know if we can fill 30 minutes with just how cool you are and how wonderful you are at your graphic design stuff. And then all of a sudden, everything got deeper and you really started to build out what you were offering and what you were doing. And not to sound corny, but kind of what you wanted to be when you grew up. And we reconnected. It was just a couple months ago. And you're like, okay, I think I got it. And we talked and I was like, oh, this is going to be such a great episode. So Josh, I'm so happy to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me here. I'm glad to finally be here.
Well, listen, brother, we are going to talk about branding today, and we're going to be talking about branding today in a very different way. Now, we've had some branding people on previously, but you are a true artist. And I mean that to my core. How you think, you breathe, you eat, you exist is in the world of being an artist. But before you went on this path, you had a little bit different of a job. You had kind of like a day job. Do you want to tell everybody where you started before we dive into this brand?
Yeah, thanks. I was a financial advisor for 9 years. I think I'm still fully licensed and registered, and it's just going to phase out just because, where FinArt is, and I'm just going to take it to the moon.
So you were a living, breathing, existing financial advisor. What happened, dude? Did you have a mystical experience, or how did you decide that you were going to move into this whole FinArt category?
Yeah. So I was having these more dilemmas coming home every night, just because I was in a private office at Prudential, and I was with a group of guys. They were top producers, but I wanted to do more financial planning. They didn't, and that was perfectly fine. But I just couldn't do what they did and go home and sleep. It got to the point where I found out about the whole independent space, and I just fell into the rabbit hole, listened to everybody's podcast, went on Twitter, found about the whole FinTwit community, and I spoke to a few of them, but I wasn't, I would say like, hey, if you know of anyone that's looking for a paraplanner or another financial planner, I love to talk to them. But my name wasn't going to be memorable. I wasn't adding enough value. So I heard on a podcast something funny, like the person said, if it was Brock Buckles, and he said, if you hear your financial advisor talking about a product that's a Roth IRA on steroids, you should probably leave that room or leave that meeting. And I thought that was hilarious. So I sketched it out, and it was the funniest thing. And I would just upload it to FinTwit. People loved it, and it slowly started transitioning to portraits. And I realized, hey, I have something here. I'm getting a lot of positive feedback. So I should really run with this and see how it can evolve over time, because it did. It evolved from portraits or from sketches to portraits, from portraits to illustrations, and from illustrations to design. So it just continues to evolve.
I've loved watching your journey, dude, because I feel like, and I know I wasn't one of the first, but I keep telling myself I was one of the first headshots that you ended up redoing. And I still have it saved to this day, because it's a piece of art that I really absolutely love. And when you talk about branding, you do talk about it in a different way than we've ever really had on the show before, because you talk about how brands, right, actually have an interactivity. It's not the right word. How brains process a really good brand. So do you mind if we start there?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So with brands, you feel that emotional connection, and that's really what a brand is. A brand isn't just a logo that you see on a billboard, or the red Coca-Cola sign, right? It's the feeling that you get when you actually see it. That's the brand. That's the meaning behind the brand, and that's what I'm trying to establish with all these other financial firms. So the brand, how the brain processes the brand is, you probably guessed it here, but it's the colors. It's the color of the brand that you see first. So when you think about, if I were to say Twitter, you would think of a light blue first. I mean, you would see light blue, and then you see the bird, or X, right? Whatever you want to call it these days. Same with Facebook. You think about that darker, warmish blue hue for the F. But then people notice the shapes. Shapes is what they see after, or they recognize after the color. And from there, it's just how your brain processes. As you can tell, it goes from colors, from that spectrum, to shapes, to text, right? So when I'm working with a brand or I'm making an illustration, I want them to understand that when people are seeing these, you want them to feel what they're seeing, and not necessarily you're reading what they're seeing. If they're reading, then you're removing them from the main objective of what your brand is doing, or what it's supposed to do.
All right. So you might have lost a little bit of my audience there. And I'm glad that you're doing this, because I need them to feel a little lost, because you're talking about this differently, which is why I wanted you on the show. We talk all the time about how important it is for you to rise above the noise, unapologetically be yourself, and be your own loud. And it's exactly what you want to take your clients through, because all of that has to hinge on feelings. All right. How do you bring highly analytical, right-brained people into the world of feelings when you're helping them create a brand?
By the best way to do it is by finding their brand archetype. And that's through what brand workshops that we do in the beginning. It's all about the discovery and the research phase. And advisors do this with their clients all the time, right? They're trying to figure out the why behind the why. And if they truly value design, or they truly value what their clients are doing in their lives to get to where they, to their goals, then they're going to want to research and discover more about that person. And we do the same thing with design, correct? And it gets to the point where we got to find out like what really fascinates them. What are their advantages in the space, and how are they different from one another, right? Everyone's a little bit different. And it can be from just, the products that they offer, or it can be something as simple as they interact with their clients. Everyone loves to be the team player and be the partner. But I just spoke to a person where, they describe themselves as a family member of like in their clients, like just like immediate family member. And that was really unique. So I had to dig in a little bit deeper to figure out exactly how that is and really how the clients perceive it too. Because I don't want the clients to say, well, that's a little weird. We don't really want you to be a family member. But if they, if they mesh with it, then that's great. But that's something very unique, right? So we got to find that uniqueness, that single most important item or thing that they have. Because, you know, there's no secret sauce. Everyone's different from one another, but they all typically have the same product and offerings. No one's doing anything revolutionary. Everyone has or follows the modern portfolio theory. You know, we have to look past all of that and really get to the feelings, the emotions, the why. It can be a value proposition to where someone said, "Hey, when I was little, um, the reason I started becoming a financial advisor is because when I was 10 years old, I used to watch my dad come home on Fridays and be ecstatic because it was payday. But every other day for the next 2 weeks, if we wanted something, it would always be, hey, payday is this day, payday is this day. And it really embedded that into my brain and it wired myself that way. So now I look at money in a different light than most people do. So you got to find those stories, and those stories really kind of brings out everything. It doesn't matter if they're very bold and energetic and erratic, or is a person that's very behind the numbers and they don't really interact as much as you and I do. They're very analytical. It doesn't matter. Everyone has a story, and we're just trying to bring that out.
What a great example, especially when you're talking about a person wanting to feel like a family member to their clients, because then, Josh, then we can start pulling that apart as you're talking about and coming up with descriptive, emotionally charged words. And that this is one of the things that I think is such an interesting difference maker with you is you as an actual artist knows what artists are looking for to create those images that elicit that emotional response. It's really funny when you were just talking about Twitter. Anytime people talk about Twitter, I immediately go to the blue bird and I think of tweeting, right? Which were little bits of information, which is what the whole thing is started or was started on. And now it's changed to a
Mhm.
terrible logo with a terrible color scheme. Are you Xing people? There's no brand continuity there. And it's actually very frustrating to those of us who've been on the Twitter train. I've been on Twitter for a long time. 14 years, I think, is what the number was the last time I got an update from Twitter. Whatever. I'm going to still call it Twitter. It's not because I'm old. I mean, I'm older, but it's because that is how I interacted with the brand for so long. And that's a big issue with financial services professionals with their brands, because they don't understand how their brand is perceived currently, even if they really don't have one, and how it needs to be perceived in the future. When you're walking somebody through this process, how do you deal, because you walked in these shoes, brother, how do you deal with somebody who has a really bad idea for their brand?
You have to guide them into figuring it out themselves. You can't just give them the answer. They have to find that answer themselves. Otherwise, they're going to push back and not want to listen to me. And I mean, I've had that happen before, and I had to find out the hard way. And this happened when I was a financial advisor, not a designer. But as a designer, um, we had a meeting with a financial firm, and after listening to their stories, we knew right away that their name had to change because their name was not cohesive with anything in their brand. Like it
Oh,
was, it's been 20 years. It's shifted, it's evolved, it no longer meshes with the brand. It's not aligned. There's no continuity anymore. And we didn't want to just flat out and say, you need a name change because this doesn't work anymore. Like we were all thinking it. And so was the owner. And it got to the point where the owner he just, came to a very slow stop. And we can see like his mind was racing. And he thought, I'm going to have to change my name, aren't I? Yeah. And so that's really how we get to that point, because we don't want to just straight up tell them what's wrong with their brand. If they do, they're going to take offense. They're going to be defensive, and they're going to hold it to their chest because you just messed with their baby, right? And that's the same thing with money. If you mess with their child or baby, they're going to just be defensive and they're not going to want to let go. So you really have to guide them into letting them figure it out themselves. And that's what we do. We have to, if they give me like a mood board or some sort of style that is cool, but doesn't necessarily relate to their brand, I don't just say this is a terrible style. This is a terrible color palette that you chose here, or this is not the right direction. I want to ask them more open-ended questions: is why did you choose this? Like what part of this do you see working with your brand? And they will typically come to the conclusion that, you know what, you're right. This doesn't necessarily work for my brand. I just really like how this looks, right? And so that's how we figure things out. And that's how we kind of, lightly lay it on them.
Well, let's continue with the lightly lay it on them, because one of the things that happens a lot in our industry is financial services professionals will say, I need a new brand. And sometimes, yes, they need an entire brand overhaul. And that is one thing. But other times, Josh, and I love this about you, since you have walked in their shoes, sometimes they just need to make a little bit of a shift, right? And it isn't need to be an entire overhaul. And that's something, and I want our audience to understand this, that you specialize in that, right? You specialize in that small shift in order to align themselves with their values, mission, vision, and all of those things that we've talked about hundreds of times on the show. How do you do that, dude? How do you just help them make a shift to maybe be a little bit more in line, or be a little bit more modern, or accentuate the things because their practice has changed?
Sorry, I just clicked my tongue, but that's a really good question. And that's why there's a difference between a brand refresh and a rebrand. When it comes to the refresh, it's the best way to describe it is like, look at your house. You have a beautiful house. You lived at it for 15 years, but things are changing. The kids are gone. You can turn their room into like a gym. You can turn it into like a studio, whatever you wanted to choose, right? So you paint the walls, you take out the old bed, you change a few accessories, you update the kitchen, you get that big island, you get the expensive stuff that you've always wanted to, right? But the structure, the framing, everything, the bones of the house is still the same, right? So with a brand, the mission, the vision, and the values can be the same. It could, evolve a little bit, but you need a new paint on the wall. You need to update those colors a little bit. You need to change the hue of that blue a little bit to align more with the brand archetype of having this very passionate brand, right? And a lot of firms typically will go with that blue and green look, or a gold and black look, but it doesn't have to look like everybody else. We can change it a little bit to make sure that it's truly aligned with your brand, because we want you to be able to tell your own story. And if you can't, then that defeats the purpose of everything that we've done. And a lot of times when people want a refresh or a rebrand, it's because there's some sort of evolution in their practice. Things are being kept up by pieces of duct tape. And they're like, all right, this is okay for now. We will fix this when we get back. That outlet's just hanging there by that one little screw, but it's okay because the electricity doesn't work anymore. Little things like that, and we come in there almost like a repairman to make everything feel not only structurally fine, but beautiful on the outside and the inside to make everyone happy.
So how long does that take, brother? So a full rebrand, when we rebranded from Top Advisor Marketing to ProudMouth, it's like a 9-month process from beginning to end. And we spent an enormous amount of money on it, and we're of course
Mhm.
over the moon about it, and actually I won
Mhm.
awards for it, which we're really happy about. But so most financial advisors, they can't do an all stop like Kirk and I did with ProudMouth. I mean, we didn't
Mhm.
all stop, but we really slowed things down because we wanted to make sure we got this right. We didn't have the bones, brother, as you're talking about. Like, we didn't have that infrastructure from a house. We were, driving a
Mhm.
Formula One race car as fast as we could while trying to repair it. So many advisors firms are at that level. They're a high functioning, well tuned, high performance machine, but they really do
Mhm.
need to do that refresh. So our audience
Yeah.
is going to want to know that. How long would that take? What can they expect? How much time do they need to be involved? Because you and I both know this, and we're not going to pick on anybody. We could. There are a lot of advisors who really need to refresh their brand. It hasn't been changed since the mid 80s or the late
Mhm.
1900s, as I love to say. So how long can that you can, since you do this for a living, what can they
Mhm.
expect?
Yeah, great question. It really depends on the size of the firm, because the more decision makers there are, the
Mm,
harder it is to finalize the design. So it can take months, right? There's cases where the big brand agencies it can take years because there's so many decision makers. Like if you're looking at like a global corporation, like good luck. Those take a lot of time. So when you see a very large brand going through a rebrand or a refresh, just know it probably took millions of dollars, and it probably took at least 18 months to put together. But for myself and my partners, Colton Etherton, shout out to him, Slices Design. It takes us roughly about 3 months,
okay.
and the reason why is because we're averaging between 1 to 2 decision makers. So we have those decision makers on the phone or on the Zoom calls with us at all times to make sure that they're they're thinking the same thing, that they're not, one person's like, hey, I really like this purple, and this other one's like, hey, I really like this green. I'm like, hey, yeah, we're not dressing up the Joker from Batman here. So let's get together and talk more, because if there is one decision maker or two decision makers and only one is on those calls and we don't see or speak to the other one, and we're getting like,
Mhm.
80% through with the designs, and they come back and go, oh, this other guy didn't like it, then holy, you know it's a failed mission at that point. So yeah, we're typically working 3 months on average. It's been speeding up a little bit just because our
Oh,
processes are really getting fine-tuned. And obviously when you get your process down to like the nitty-gritty, then you can kind of speed it up a little bit. So we are getting to that point, so we love it. So we're hoping to speed it up a little bit more, take on more. But for the bigger firms that have more decision makers, more stakeholders, it will take time. We can't speed it up because we have to wait for those meetings. We have to wait for the availability of those decision makers to have a clear schedule to spend an hour to 3 hours with us, every couple of weeks.
you're coming at all of this with a design mind, which I think is a big differentiator between you and a lot of other branding firms, which is,
Mhm.
again, one of the reasons why I wanted to present your philosophy to our audience. When you get the design done, there are many other components of a brand that advisors need to internalize. How do you then transfer what you do from a design perspective to finish out their brand?
That's a great question. Are you asking like after the logo has been developed, the typography, and you're really getting into more of like maybe the copywriting, maybe the messaging behind the brand? Okay, great. So when I'm developing the logo, and I'm figuring out the color palettes, it's I've changed this process has changed before, because I used to just dive, like after I get the mood board and I had the phone call, the discovery call, I would just dive into the logo. And then I would look at a few different color palettes and I would say, oh, like this will look good with this logo, this direction, this typeface will look good here. But instead, I've been coached to do it backwards. I would figure out the color palettes, because the color palettes based on the brand archetype will give you that emotion that people want. So when you want a brand is to feel the feeling, the emotion, right? You want to start with that emotion first. And if your brain is automatically going to recognize colors first, then we should start with the colors first too. So we start with the colors, and then we based on the colors, we can start to kind of see in our head a little bit of the shape of everything. So we start with that. We start with the typeface, or then we go into the typeface. But as I'm building that out, I'm seeing like into the future of like different visual elements. How can we use these colors, this typeface, this logo into brand textures? How can we create a pattern for them? How can we create like a photography style? How can we overall create this art direction? So when I'm in the very beginning of like the first two phases of my brand process, I'm thinking phases 3 and 4 to make sure that by the time I get there, I have a really good idea, and I'm writing these ideas down. I'm saving them on my phone, and it's going to be built out so that I don't ever go into a logo design. I don't ever show a logo direction or style to a client without seeing what it can potentially become once they've selected it. So I typically show anywhere from 2 to 3 different directions, and all 3 of those directions will have a like art direction, photography style, um, letterhead style, business card style that comes with it. I just haven't shown it yet because I don't want it to
Yeah.
during the presentation, I don't want it to sway the client. I want them to look at the bones of it first.
One of the neat things, and I love that you're talking about art direction, because if you're directing a movie or if you're making a painting, you are truly trying to, and we talked about this right at the top, elicit a very specific emotional response. And that is what is going to guide your brand language. So if the words that you come up with during your discovery process are bold, energetic. I don't know. I'm just pulling stuff out of my keister here, dude. But that means that when you write your website, when you write social media, when you're speaking in public, the colors that you wear as a personal branding all stem from all of that. Because really, Josh, you're really the first person I've had on the show who really has such a design mind. Is that where you then take them from there? Is to help them figure out what the voice and the feeling is going to be to make it really entirely throughout all of the rest of their stuff that's client facing?
Yep, exactly right. So when it comes to anything from the website to social media post to, let's say, like a graphic we make for them, we want that direction all have the same tone of voice, right? And that's all initially stemmed from the very beginning of figuring out the brand archetype. And the brand archetype is really the North Star. So we always go back to the North Star to figure out exactly how their messaging and their voice should sound like. And we take that throughout every little thing. So if we have a brand rollout, you can believe that that tone of voice will be there, and they're gonna feel that by looking at the colors. They're gonna feel that by looking at the shapes, the logos, but they're gonna read it and visually understand it by the words that we use. And so that's gonna be the most important. But yes, with the website too, we want to make sure that they're using language that they're going to be using across all different mediums, right? We don't want them to say bespoke because everyone uses the word bespoke, and it's now like lost this. It's lost this. It's fancy, custom, unique look, right? It's regular now, unless you have a fine wine dine, 3-piece suit look, and you want to feel like a very luxurious Mercedes brand, then bespoke might work. But for the average, no.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely love when I run into a brand and I feel that, right? When there
Yep.
where there is so much emotional charge to everything that they're doing, from how they're writing to how they're speaking to the products and services that they create. This is all what you have to consider when you're going through either a brand modification, kind of like a not that full overhaul, just that kind of refresh, as you had said,
Mhm.
all the way down to really rebuilding everything from ground up. Okay, so I'm going to ask you my absolute favorite question that I ask on the show, which is like, what did I miss, dude? What should I have asked you that I didn't?
Where can people learn what I've learned and
Oh,
take advantage of it and do it themselves? Like, I think I think having a North Star for your brand is huge. And I think if you have a North Star, you can always go back to it. And it does kind of relate into the brand positioning statement that people have. But if they want to truly like dig deep and figure out who they truly are, then I would read oh, I wish I had the book here, but her name is Sally Hogshead. I'm pretty sure that's her last name. I apologize if I got that wrong, but it's Sally Hogshead. She was a creative director. She's an award-winning author. But she developed this system to help people find their North Stars. And I think they should read her books, which are called like the Fascinate Advantage. She has like a whole system around it. But I think that's a great starting point. Because people can go out and get a logo from us, from Fiverr, from any other designers. I wouldn't do Fiverr, but they can. But this makeshift look is not going to help you down the road. You got to truly discover yourself, and listening to her is going to be like the biggest benefit to the team when it comes to self-discovery.
Dude, it's totally not where I thought you were going to go with that. But I love that. How nice. What a great gift that you just gave to our audience. But here's the deal, brother. They don't have the time to do this. They don't have the expertise, and most of them don't have the creative foundation to do it. And you all know who are listeners. I'm not being mean. I just know all of you pretty darn well. All right. So Josh, I'm sure there's going to be people who want to know more and want to engage you for a brand refresh or for graphic design treatment and all of that sort of stuff. Where should they go and how can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. They can email me or they can go to my website, which is www.thefinartist.com. You can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter under the same, The Fin Artist. I post pretty, I would say regularly for the most part. Yeah, I mean, a lot of like my online portfolio is LinkedIn and Twitter, so you'll be able to see all my work if you want to scroll down. You can message me. I'm very open to conversation. I'm not one of those people that just looks at a message and just ghosts you. I will respond back. I love talking about it, so I'm not going to shut you down. And they can go on my website if they want to inquiry about a brand refresh or a rebrand or even just the beginning of their brand identity. Then they can send me an inquiry or an email through my website.
Well, listen, everybody, as we wrap today up, if you, as an advisor, want to work with somebody who has walked in your shoes and been an advisor who now has been able to find his creative spark to truly help you communicate who you are, what you do, and what makes you unique and different, please reach out to Josh. One of my favorite things to do on your Twitter profile is click media. Because that's where all of your graphic design work. So please, everybody, do that. We're going to make sure that we have all of those links in the show notes. If you want to have your ability to really separate yourself from the advisor down the street, stop being the best kept secret, but more importantly, give yourself the gift of unapologetically being yourself, to truly feel when you go into work that you're proud of who you are, what you do, and more importantly, how people see you, the brand is the place to start. So for Josh, this is Matt Halloran, and we'll see all of you on the other side of the mic very soon.